remarkable, and I think the credit goes to our system, our open democratic system that gives everyone a chance to participate, and that's why I think it is fantastic for people who've never been involved in any sort of way, shape or form to put their hands up to be involved, because it changes the types of decisions that we make and it changes the types of communities that we build. I grew up in Sri Lanka, which some of you might know was a country that was torn apart by war, and one of the reasons that we eventually left Sri Lanka. And I mention that because I think that experience shaped why I eventually ran for local government, actually. It's one of the reasons I got really interested in politics, because I think when you grow up in those circumstances, and everyone has different life experiences that motivate them to get more involved politically or in the community in some way. But we saw firsthand what the difference between a good politician and a bad politician, if I can put it in such simplistic terms, was. The difference was, for us, the difference between peace and war. So politics was talked about all the time around the kitchen table because it made such a big difference to our everyday lives and our own sense of peace and safety. We eventually moved to Australia to find safer shores. But my interest in social change and social justice just kept growing and growing, and I was very interested in the types of communities that we landed into. And I think as a young migrant, as a young child coming into a new place, you notice everything around you. And one of the things I did notice, I remember when we moved around, was just how important having facilities and opportunities to meet other people was for your own life and your well-being. So if there was a pool or the school or a space that you could meet other young people close by to your home, because often your parents had to be working because it was tough to make it, you really relied on those opportunities in your community to make a life.
In 8 years ago now, it was about 2009, I made a decision that really did change my life, and that was that I joined a political party and I joined the Greens. And what that meant for me was that I was now part of a local group that was sort of interested in similar things. One of the most remarkable things from that experience was that I got to know about local government, because we had 2 local government councillors who were representing Greens who worked on Moreland City Council. I hadn't had a lot of interaction in my life with local government up until then. I knew it existed, knew a little bit about it, but I really did know the ins and outs of this work. And through that work, through just by being involved in sort of a political group and getting to see that work and getting reports back, I just went, wow, this is really fascinating. And I got to know the breadth and depth of local government councillors and local government as a body in itself. So it really sparked my interest, and it seemed to really align with the things I was really interested in terms of how do you build really good communities that are vibrant and thrive and give people a chance to participate. And eventually, when it came to 2012, when local government elections were around the corner, I decided to put my hand up, and very thankfully I was successful, along with 10 other councillors on our council. I ran because I wanted to shape my community in a really positive way. I was really interested in things like ensuring that we keep our environment safe and clean. I was really interested in environmental justice and ensuring that we act on climate change, and that happens at a local level. Really interested in things like how do you create cities that are friendly to people, that are safe for pedestrians and cyclists, and not imposing if urban development goes the wrong way. And obviously that's been a really topical conversation in this community. So I was hearing about the conversations, and I was getting more interested in what we could do to create better outcomes. I was also interested in the trust people had with levels of government, so transparency, accountability, how do you instill trust and confidence at a time when there's so much cynicism and there's a lot of cynicism about politics, and sort of a hopelessness that sometimes sets in about sort of different levels of power. And I really do believe that good people should be in there and champion for change, or you can never create that change. So there were a number of things that motivated me, and here I am 4 years later, having had quite a significant, had a fantastic ride through local government. The role is wide and varied. I don't think there are many other jobs that you get to know your community in such an intimate way, and knowing that breadth and depth has been one of the most rewarding things for me personally. Being a councillor, as some of you might know, involves lots of meetings, and some of those meetings are the formal meetings where you're making decisions, but a lot of those meetings are also getting information so that you're properly informed and can make a really educated decision on something, because it's a great responsibility that you have, and I take that responsibility very seriously in terms of trying to make the best decision possible with the most information possible. You do a lot of work with meeting community members, understanding what issues are bubbling around the community, and wanting to work with the community to be able to act and create some change around that. There's committee work. I've loved the committee work. It's been one of the highlights of my time on council. I'm part of the Disability Advisory Committee and the Reconciliation Advisory Committee, and a number that come and go, some time-limited ones as well, and the Oxygen Youth Committee as well. There's advocacy, there's policy work, and you can make it as big or small a role as I think you really want to, and it's really about how much you want to give into it. And ultimately, it is service. It is community. It's a form of community service. So I think that makes it even more rewarding. I'll just finish on some of the challenges and also some of the surreal gains you get from it. I think we'll hear a bit more tonight about the challenges of the workload. So I've worked while I've been a councillor, you get paid allowance, but often it's not enough to sustain sort of full wage. So I've worked generally 3-4 days, at times 5 days on top of being on council. And that is, that's pretty challenging, lots and lots of juggling. But I think it's because it's so stimulating and rewarding, it keeps you going. You're working across, lots of different, so you really have to, it makes you really sharp in terms of your negotiation and mediation skills, and I think that really develops you as a person in so many aspects in life, not just in your professional life. So I think that's actually a gain, although it can be a challenge as well. And just, I guess in conclusion, in terms of what you get out of it, you get so much out of it. It is hard work, but it is exhilarating. You get to change your community in so many positive ways. I can just think of a number of things that we've done over the last few years. Our zero carbon evolution strategy, where we're taking really serious action on climate change that's affecting our communities. That the community is talking a lot more about than they did even 4 years ago about urban heat island effect and ensuring that we can protect people from some of the climate variations that we're seeing. We've got affordable, starting to establish an affordable land trust. Looking at putting money into social and affordable housing, and that's tackling some of the gaps that we see at other levels of government in terms of trying to make housing more affordable, because we see the impact that it has on our community at a very local level. We've had some good urban development outcomes. It's a pretty challenging space, but we're trying to push for better development outcomes in our community, and we've seen so much done on sustainable transport and making sure our cities are friendly to people who want to use a non-car option travelling around and decreasing congestion. So they're just some of the things I'm really proud of across a whole range more, and happy to talk about a few more of those things when we get into Q&A. So sorry, a bit over. Thanks, Nerina.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Ratnam. I'd now like to tell you a little bit about the background of our second speaker, Councillor Meghan Hopper. Councillor Hopper is our councillor responsible for the status of women. Meghan is also the youngest female to be elected mayor in Moreland, a role which she held in 2014-15. Meghan's also recently elected State Secretary of the Australian Local Government Women's Association and is completing a PhD in political journalism and gender studies, and is also currently the Senior Policy Officer at Volunteering Victoria. Please join me in welcoming Councillor Meghan Hopper.
Thank you. Thanks, Nerina. And look, thank you so much to everyone for coming out tonight. It's wonderful to see so many women from various walks of life interested in what we do in local government and hopefully thinking about running at the end of this year. I came into local government from a place of having been very involved in getting women elected. I'd spent 2 years working for Emily's List, which is the women's organisation that's aligned to the Labor Party, and working there to help women get elected at a state and a federal level, promoting them and helping them to raise money for campaigns, which can often be one of the hardest things about running when you are a woman and leading a busy lifestyle. And it was through that organisation that I saw the value of having women's voices at the table and making sure that they were equally represented. And so when the council elections came around in 2012, my friend Alice Pryor, who'd been elected to Moreland City Council at the age of 19 as a very young woman and was retiring at the ripe old age of 27, was standing down from council. She sort of said to me, have you thought about doing this? And I thought, well, it's time to put my money where my mouth is and have the experience myself of running as a candidate. So I was elected in 2012 alongside Councillor Ratnam in the South Ward at the age of 27. And after that, I was very lucky to become Deputy Mayor at the age of 28 and then Mayor at the age of 29. And it's been an incredible experience being in local government. And throughout my time in local government, I've continued to be very active within the space of women's advocacy and gender representation and making sure that women are getting elected at various levels. I'm now the national convener of the Labor Women's Network, and as Nerina mentioned, I've just recently been elected State Secretary of the Local Government Women's Association. So it's I think that by having women at the table, we do represent different issues and different perspectives. And certainly during our time on council, some of the issues that we've had the opportunity to talk about that very specifically represent and focus on women. We had a petition from a number of women, and particularly young women in the Brunswick area a couple of years ago, following the tragic death of Jill Maher, saying, you know, we would like to see a number of measures put in place to make this area feel a little bit safer for us when we're walking home at night. And so as a result of that, you know, council put a great deal of money into replacing the street lights around the Sydney Road corridor with LED lighting rather than the old yellow lighting that we used to have there. And that's just made it so much whiter and brighter when people are walking home late at night, but it's also far more energy efficient. So over time, we're actually saving funds by having done that as a one-off. We also put in the park at Wilson Avenue. So if any of you are down in Brunswick, you might be familiar down near Dual Train Station. There's a park which has a bouldering wall there, which we opened last year. And you might sit there and think, well, hang on, what does that have to do with women's safety? But that was actually the #1 crime hotspot in the city of Moreland. And so by putting a park in there, it activates space and it makes people feel proud of their community and a little bit safer and want to respect and care for the community that they live in. We also had some great initiatives around women's safety as part of a panel that was put together a couple of years ago, a women's safety panel that featured representatives from organisations like Women's Information Support and Housing in the North, domestic violence organisations, and they contributed a lot of thoughts about how we could spend some funding on women's safety, and that contributed to a program which council now runs for new fathers and just respectful relationships. So there's been a lot of work that we've had the opportunity to do over the last couple of years that I do think by having a majority of female councillors at the table involved in those discussions, we've been able to put the case more strongly for those things to take place. So about running for council, I know that a lot of you are probably sitting there thinking, how does this work and what do I do and what does running for council look like and what happens when we get there? It's a really rewarding and tiring experience running for council. As Councillor Ratnam mentioned, certainly I'm also a member of a political party. Having those networks and that previous experience of having run for student politics and having been involved in other people's campaigns really did help me to know how to run a campaign. But that's not to say that you can't run as an independent. And in fact, my deputy mayor last year was also a young woman who ran as an independent. And we have a real mixture of political representation on our council. So please don't think if you're not from a political background that that's not a reason to run. We do need people from all walks of life to be thinking about running for council and sharing their experience. But it does really help to have a support network of friends and family around you who are going to do the hard yards and help you campaign. We're one of the few remaining councils that has attendance elections in Moreland. Most of the councils in Victoria run postal ballots. I really love attendance elections. I was part of the councillors that voted to retain that this year. I think it gives us that one extra opportunity to meet with voters on election day and talk to them before they go in and make their decision. But it does mean it's a long slog and a hard slog by the time you get to election day, and it can be quite expensive to run a council campaign. So you do need to think about, you know, how you're going to fundraise and whether there are individuals or organisations who might be able to support you in that endeavour and help you out with your campaign to make it as accessible and affordable as possible. Once you get elected onto council, as Councillor Ratnam said, it's really up to every individual how much you choose to involve yourself. When I initially got elected onto council, I was working 2 days a week alongside doing my PhD. I'm now working 4 days a week alongside my PhD. When I was mayor, I was just mayor full-time. So that was a full-time role for me, and I gave up the work that I was doing at the time. So it is varying sort of of experience of trying to balance council with your work and your life outside of council. In terms of the time commitment, we have a formal council meeting once a month. It normally goes from 6 p.m. when we come in for dinner and meet with one another before the meeting through to 11 p.m, but sometimes it can go later than that. It just depends on the agenda. We have briefings once a fortnight, which are an opportunity for us to find out from directors and officers about all the information that we need to know in order to make an informed decision. You can choose to be on Urban Planning Committee, which I have been 3 out of my 4 years on council, and that again has a formal meeting once a month which goes for about 3 hours and has its own briefings. And then there are a range of committees that you can choose to get involved in. So I'm the councillor on Moreland Libraries Advisory Committee. I'm on the board of Ceres Environment Park in Brunswick. I'm on all of our arts boards and committees as councillor responsible for the arts, and as councillor responsible for status of women, I occasionally have meetings and engagements in relation to that. So it really is up to you how much you choose to put in, but I definitely think that the most rewarding part of being on council is the time that we get to spend out in the community, hearing from the people that we represent, and particularly, you know, during my term as mayor, I think that was the thing that I really took away from that, was the absolute privilege of having a year of your life to just spend full time in the community, and meeting the people that make our community tick every day. I don't think that it's very often that you get that opportunity in life to take a year out of, you know, normal 9-to-5 work and other responsibilities and just spend your day going from community group to community group and hearing their concerns and trying to help them out with what's going on in their life. So I hope that gives you a bit of an overview of what we do on council, and what it takes to campaign, and what might make you think about running for council. You might have any number of issues that you're interested in. I came onto council because my family had lived in the area for over 100 years, and so I was very interested in the heritage and the history of this area and in preserving that in the face of a lot of growing development, and how we can keep development sustainable in Moreland, so accommodating all of the many people that want to live here because it is one of the best places to live in the world, but continue to keep the history and the culture that makes this area amazing. I campaign on the arts. I'm very passionate about the arts and creative community, and that's something that I've had the pleasure of being able to represent while I've been on council very actively. And I also spoke a lot about women's safety and representation during my campaign. So those are issues that are very special to me and that I've worked on council, but you might come to it with completely different issues that you've represented in your community or want to represent. So I hope that gives you some information, and yeah, looking forward to the broad discussion and answering any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Hopper. Now I'd like to take a few minutes just to talk a little bit about, I guess, the roles, the different roles of councillors and the CEO, and how we work together. Absolutely. So I'm going to talk about the different roles of councillors and the CEO and how we work together. Just by way of background, I've worked at Moreland for nearly about 6 years, originally as the Director of Infrastructure for 4 years, and then as coming back also into this role for the last 18 months. I've had nearly 20 years of experience in local government in senior management roles, and prior to that, I'm an engineer, so don't hold that against me, but prior to that I was working as an offshore oil rig engineer prior to discovering, being very happy to have discovered local government. Probably most importantly, I've had a 40-year association with Moreland. I grew up here, probably about 3 minutes in that direction, Coburg and Fawkner, and I live about 5 minutes in that direction now. So I think that's a really, really wonderful privilege to be able to work with my community, which is great. So I'm going to talk just first about, I guess, some of the key things to do with the different roles. So councillors are the highest decision-making level. When councillors come together at a formal council meeting, they have the power to make any resolution. So that's the point at which any resolution made by council is, it's almost at a local level similar to what happens in Parliament. What they decide is what we do. And councillors' power is as an elective, as a collective. So as a group, they have the power to make those decisions together. It's not individual because, I guess, councillors come from lots of different areas and have lots of different views. It's as a collective, and that helps us to make sure we're always working in our direction or the same direction. They govern the city by setting council's plan, adopting council's budget, and adopting policies and strategies. And also making the big decisions like the awarding of major contracts. And so by setting those things up, what that does for the organisation is it tells us what we need to deliver, and it tells us how to deliver it as well. So council will have policies on certain issues, and that gives us guidance as officers about how to do this work. So we know council agrees to this but not to that. That helps us every day to guide our work. So I'm council's only direct employee, and my job is to head the organisation to deliver council's wishes and to deliver council's resolutions. So that's ultimately my job. My job's also to provide council and councillors with advice on a range of issues, particularly things like legal issues or infrastructure issues or any information-based issues or technical issues, and I do that through the officers. We have officers with lots of different backgrounds and disciplines, and they are here to support council. So I think in the corridors there was a question before about what sort of qualifications do councillors need. There's lots of different qualifications, and also because councillors have access to lots of other people who all have these qualifications and are there to support council, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to know everything. I think that's a really important point because we are there to help. The relationship between councillors and the CEO / the organisation is a very, very complex one, and can make the difference between a golden age of really high achievement or not a great time. It can make the difference. On one hand, there's a really important firewall almost between council and officers, and that's to make sure that there's no sort of direction of officers or direction of resources, so councillors are fair to each other, and it makes sure that all council has some transparent agreement as to what we work on. But on the other hand, through me, what we try to do is align the organisation to council's wishes and to delivering within their agenda. We try to align ourselves and make sure that we're operating in the way that council wishes us to operate. The other point is that we're operating in terms of council's collective wishes, and that's really important. Otherwise, it would be very easy to go in many different directions. So that's something we work really, really hard on. So what this means is really the really important issue of having an open and an honest relationship between councillors and myself, which I think we have. It means, for me, the sorts of skills that are really important, not so much the technical skills, which is interesting because that's kind of how you get into these roles. It's not those skills, though, that make a difference here. It's actually more about how you listen and how you're able to help councillors, if there's different views, come to some collective agreement. And sometimes there might be one councillor who has a view or has an idea, and sometimes part of my role is just assisting in how might you bring this before the rest of council? What else might we do to help council come to an agreed position on an issue? So often it's those people skills, and they're often the skills that women are renowned for, that are actually the skills that help this multiple negotiation that happens amongst councillors and the consistent direction taking that's happening for me in the organisation. So for me, I actually have a mantra that I think, I repeat often, and I say this in the organisation. The staff here probably might know this, but my mantra is that my job is to give every bit of good information and support to council, and to be absolutely honest in my advice, even if maybe not everyone would like what I'm saying. Absolute honesty. But then, when there's a resolution, my job is to deliver exactly that, and to deliver it to the spirit that it has been passed. And whether or not my advice has been taken, that doesn't matter. It was there, and council, who is democratically elected and has the proper right to make this decision, basically directs me, and that's what I do. So this is the mantra, and I find myself saying this often and to myself, and it's actually a very good compass that helps make sure our roles are clear and that we can keep working well together. My role also plays a strong support to the Mayor. And I've been very lucky. These have been our 2 last mayors, so I've been really, really lucky to work with these 2 brilliant mayors. The mayor's role is to work also, amongst other things, but one of their really critical roles is actually to work back with the rest of the council group. So remember that issue of collective? There's a lot of work for a mayor in helping to get some kind of collective view on things and to help councillors work together. So the mayor does a lot of that. And in the meantime, I work with the organisation to help the organisation deliver what's needed. And so the connection between the CEO and the mayor is super important because that's the nexus between those 2 different spheres. And when that works really well, it can be really wonderful. That's part of that golden alignment that you can achieve. Just generally about Moreland, it's one of the larger inner city metro councils. It has around 166,000 people and 1,075 staff. Most of our services are provided by our own employed staff rather than contractors, and close to 40% of our staff live here, which is really important. So close to 40% of our people are living and working for their city, which I think makes a big difference in terms of the kind of commitment and the kind of dedication that I see in a lot of our offices. We deliver over 160 very different services for our community, largely by our community. We probably have one of the most diverse organisations you can find, over 160 services, very different ones, all together under one organisation and one executive management team. We'll have town planners working alongside maternal and child health nurses, next to engineers, next to road workers. Now, if you think of the organisations you interact with every day, I don't know that you would find that kind of breadth in most contemporary organisations. It is a very unusual thing, and for me is actually probably one of the things that I love the best about it because it's just really interesting. It's incredibly interesting. There is a lot of community contact, both through the councillors and also directly. We handle close to 70,000 service requests every year. That's growing as fast as our population is growing. It can be challenging because there's a lot of different stakeholders to be thinking about. It's not always a simple right answer because one person may have a view and another person may have a different view. So you've got to work out what's generally best from a public interest perspective all the time, and that may not always be exactly what each person would like for themselves. So that's quite challenging. But I honestly think that if you have a respect for democracy, you would love local government. But I think you've got to have a bit of a love for democracy as well. So I think the final comment from me is really, about the one key currency in my mind, the key currency that makes all of this work, which I think is really important in a council group and in a new council group, is to have a strong, trusting and respectful relationship between the CEO and the councillors. It is, as I said before, we talk about encouraging women into becoming councillors. It's one of the things that, women do have often wonderful people skills and listening skills and negotiation skills. So it's an area that women can really excel in. So I hope that gives you just a little bit of a taste, and I'd love to open it up to questions to our panel. Thanks. Any questions? We can't have answered everything. Okay. Yep, Joanna.
Have you observed attitudes towards women, say, who have got families on the council, and whether how if other members, whether they're male or female, sort of might judge them if they're not 100% at every single committee meeting and all of that. So I guess it's just a question to put out there about parenthood as well.
Happy to, yeah, sure. Sure. So the question was around whether we've observed any sort of attitudes or, what the particular reception is for councillors who are also parents. And I think we'll go to the most obvious example, which is one of our councillors who became a parent while on council, and we've had a couple of councillors over the years, both Kathleen Matthews-Ward and Linka Thompson. My observation has been that we're pretty open and progressive sort of institutions. So I really haven't observed it. It'd be really interesting to hear from Lenka's perspective, actually, what she noticed as a difference. So that's a good question for her if she might not be able to make it here tonight. But I think, all that stuff about the policy settings are really important as well, to make sure that the questions are asked early on about what will be the arrangements, is there appropriate childcare, all that sort of stuff that could enable someone to participate if they're a parent. So that's the sort of stuff that we need to look at. And some of them that gets sort of tested when that happens. So what I've observed has been, it's been a good council, and perhaps that is a product of having a number of women on council who've had families as well. And I think, we've benefited from fantastic legacies of previous councillors. So it'd be good to ask somebody who was there, a couple of terms ago too.
Yeah, I think, as Sam said, we're pretty lucky at Moreland. We've got a majority of women on council. We've got a very diverse experience. Certainly the most obvious example is Councillor Thompson. There's only, actually, of the female councillors, there's 2 who are parents at the moment. So Councillor Thompson is the one. Councillor Leader Gillies has an adult child, and so Councillor Thompson's had a child more recently while she's been on council. And, not speaking for her, but I do remember when we had our longest council meeting of this term, for example, it was a meeting that went until close to midnight in our second year on council, and she was very, very heavily pregnant. I think she was about 6 or 7 months along, and we got to a tea break at about 11 p.m, and I just turned around and I was like, could somebody find her some fruit or something? So it must be challenging. Like, I certainly imagine that if you are in the late stages of pregnancy or when you first had a child, I've heard of other councils, not our council, but for example, a rural council in Victoria with a young female councillor who'd had a baby, where they just couldn't wrap their head around the idea of her taking leave from council, and it actually had to go to a vote of councillors, and some of them voted against it. So there wasn't policy in place for when one of their councillors did get pregnant. And we're advanced in that we have a majority of women councillors, and we fairly consistently had women and young women on council, women of a childbearing age. But there are a lot of rural councils who only have one woman on council for the first time this term. So this is the first term of Victorian local government where every local government has at least one woman. So as recently as 2012, there were councils in Victoria that had no women on them. So there are some councils that are very far behind us in adjusting to that, but I think that we're quite lucky.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll tell one story while you're thinking of the next question. I'm just you were talking a little bit about that issue of parenting and the juggling that happens. It is the same at an officer's end as well, and I think the comment about Moreland being really progressive is absolutely true. And I think there is something in our culture and the flavour of Moreland that is about supporting people to be able to do all of the different things that make up a rich life, including your parenting responsibilities. But the story I was going to tell was actually one of the mayoralties, actually, and I think it was Councillor Thompson who was close to having a child, and we actually arranged for one of our maternal and child health nurses to be on site just in case. So we do everything we can to support that. As opposed to some of the other examples that we just talked about. So, great.
What sort of allowances or conditions, considering the late meetings, if you do have young children, if you don't have support at home, what sort of allowances are there within the conditions?
I think it's yeah. So the question that we got was what sort of allowances can be made for councillors. Oh, right. Okay. I was going to say more in terms of time because it is very flexible. So, as long as we have quorum, councillors are able to leave meetings at various points if they need to do that. Of course, people don't want to do that and miss meetings, but it is a possibility if they need to. I'm aware of a woman that I used to work with who's now a councillor in Western Australia, and she'd just given birth 2 months before getting elected to council, and she takes her little boy along to all of her meetings and has him in in a cot next to her at the council meetings. And I know that when Kathleen Matthews' ward had her kids, they came along to like the mayoral vote and a couple of council meetings as well. It was sort of running in and out. They're a little bit older. So in terms of, time and making sure that they're able to attend and fully participate in council meetings, we have those resources. I don't really know in terms of like remuneration and I think we've just got notes. This is our governance manager, Lydia Harding, has supplied notes for us. So Nerina might be able to answer that one for you more fully.
Okay. So I'm going to actually read something to you. Exactly as it's written. The Act provides that a council may reimburse councillors for necessary out-of-pocket expenses incurred while performing the duties of a councillor. These include family carer allowance, travel, private vehicle use, compensated at the Australian Taxation Office rate, and direct expenses such as meal refreshments, stationery and cab charges. So we have some details that come from the Councillor Support and Reimbursement Policy, which should be on our website. And there is so separate to that, there is also an annual allowance that is paid to councillors. Just check quickly with the governance manager. Which category is that? The Category 3. Okay. So there's a number of categories that mayors and councillors can be reimbursed at. So we're Category 3 councillors because our municipality is of the size that it is. So our councillors can be reimbursed between $12,000 and $28,000 a year. So that's the allowance. So in a sense, I guess the salary for being in council, and the mayor at $92,000. And that's a full-time position. That means giving up your work to be the mayor. Okay, does that answer your question? Yep. Yep. So it allows, so we're actually at the higher end, we're at the $28,000 end. Keep looking at my governance manager to make sure I'm not telling you the wrong thing. And it's a decision that can be set. It's a decision that can be set. So it just means that we're given this range within which to operate. Yeah. So for Moreland, it's at the $28,000 end. Yeah, great. I'm going to hand over to answer that, but before I do, I just want to say for those watching at home, we're also taking your questions. Just use the hashtag WomenMCC. I'll hand over.
So yes, there's Moreland is broken up into 3 wards, and that similarly happens in many other councils, a number of wards, and then there's a number of councillors elected per ward. So we have 3 wards. The southern ward, which both Councillor Hopper and I are representative of, we're 2 of 3 councillors in that ward. Then the northeast and the northwest wards each have 4 councillors elected, so that makes up the 11. So you generally run in a particular ward. You don't have to live in that ward to run in that ward. You have to live in the city of Moreland to run for council, but you don't have to live in the ward that you're running for. So people do, mix that up as well. So. Other question?
Do you have to, just quickly, do you have to live in the city of Moreland to run for
Yes.
council?
Yes. Or own a property. Be a ratepayer.
Sorry, the question was, do you have to live in the city of Moreland to run as a councillor? Yes, you have to live in the city of Moreland or own a property, so you're a ratepayer in the city of Moreland. No problem.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned that campaigns can be expensive.
Look, every candidate is different and it does depend on whether you've got a political party supporting you. So in my case, I am a member of a political party, but my party made the decision not to endorse candidates in the last council election, and so we ran as independents. So we could put on our materials, Meghan Hopper is a member of the Australian Labor Party, but not any logos or receive any financial support from the party. So it was up to us to find all of our money. Some councils councillors, and you can go on the website and see our financial returns, you do have to declare any donation that you receive that is over $500 from an individual or organisation. So you will see that some councillors receive donations from businesses in the city of Moreland who wanted to support them. I didn't receive any donations over $500, so all of my donations were small, from friends and family members, and sort of from the trade union movement, or they were in kind. So my parents built my A-frames and chipped in for my T-shirts and things like that. If I'm being honest, at the end of the day, my campaign cost me around $7,000 all up. That's probably mid-range in terms of what people spent in the city of Moreland. There are some councillors who will spend in excess of $10,000, or two in particular that spent quite a bit more than that. But there are some councillors who will run on $2,000 and get up. So it really just does depend. For an attendance election, it does incur expenses that wouldn't be involved in a postal election. Those are primarily how to vote cards on election day, and more visual materials, so things like corflutes that you would put up at a booth on election day, and you do need to have enough volunteers to staff your booth on election day. So those are the things that you sort of need to take into consideration.
Can you elaborate on campaigning? Like, where do you begin?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's just a big question mark. Like, how do you start? How do you,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
what did you do?
Yeah, so I'll answer, and then, so for people at home, the question was, can we elaborate on campaigning? So where do you even start and what do you do? So my campaign involved 2 mail pieces. So one of my mail pieces was addressed. So when you nominate for council, you are supplied with a computer disc that lists all of the names and addresses of enrolled voters in the city of Moreland, and you're not allowed to reproduce that, and you have to destroy it when the election is over, but that is to assist you in campaigning. So I used that disc to get the addresses of everyone who lived in the city of Moreland, and I did a letter that was double-sided and had photos and writing, and then was in an envelope with the name and address on the front. And that was my most expensive single piece of advertising, because, obviously doing the envelope and the printing, it all added up. And then I got my volunteers to letterbox that. My second mail piece was what's referred to as a DL card, which is just like a glossy sort of half A4 page card that's double-sided in colour, and that wasn't particularly expensive. And again, I had that letterboxed by volunteers. I then had 50 corflutes, which are the sort of plastic signs that you might see in yards, for example, or at booths on election day. I had A-frames to put those signs on. So when I was standing at pre-poll, you also need volunteers to staff pre-poll for 3 weeks before election day. So when I was standing at pre-poll, I had an A-frame there, or like if I was standing in a shopping centre or whatnot. T-shirts. I had T-shirts. There are various community groups that put on candidate forums in the lead up to the election. So you have the opportunity to go along to those and speak to members of the public about why you're running and what you're standing for. The local paper normally also publishes some information about the candidates. So those are free ways that you can get your message out there. I'm just trying to think of anything else that... Yeah, absolutely. So I had a Facebook page and a Twitter handle. The other thing that I did was train stations. So I stood at train stations in the morning or at peak hour in the evening and handed out just a little sort of postcard flyer that I'd printed up at home to people as they were getting on and off the train, and had a chat to them, and shopping centres. So I just stood at Berkeley Square Shopping Centre and had a chat to people on the way in and out. So those are probably the main ways of campaigning, and then there's the good old-fashioned door knock, which can be hard for women in particular. And my first time running for council, I have to admit, I didn't door knock a lot. I found that really challenging, the idea of sort of just going on my own and knocking on people's doors and not knowing who was going to answer on the other side. I think as I've been on council for a little bit longer, I'm now more confident going out and door knocking on my own. But it can be very challenging for single women in particular to go out and just knock on doors. So, you know, if you've got a friend who will come along with you, you can alternate doors and it just makes it feel a little bit safer.
Thanks, Councillor Hopper. They covered it very, very well. And the only thing I'd add is in terms of preparations, I think there's campaigning and there's preparation and they sort of mix together, but also in terms of preparing for being on council. You know, attending a council meeting or watching it on our wonderful live stream would be really, really good to get a sense of some of the issues and that we're working with some of the processes and getting a sense of whether it's something you want to be part of as well. But also that helps you then get to know what the current issues are. So when you are campaigning, you know, you can speak into those issues. Because I think that's really, really important because people will be asking you, you know, why are you running and what things you want to see done and what do you want to achieve. So knowing what's actually happening in the community, visiting community groups, getting to know those issues is a really important part of preparation, which also then feeds into campaigning. Because then, you know, in terms of your materials and what you're going to say to people when you're saying, please vote for me, you know, you want to be able to reflect some of those things in those materials as well. So I think that preparation is really important as well. Sure.
How many people generally vote in local government elections?
That's a good question. Well, everyone's supposed to vote in local government elections. I think you get a lower turnout. So we get around a 65%, I believe, turnout across the electorate, and some areas more than others. So I know in the South Ward, in our ward, but there's a lot of turnover in the population, so that accounts for some of it. I think it was around 55%, I think the turnout was. So it's pretty low. So it's higher in the northern parts. And I think attendance, postal, there's a difference as well. Most local governments sit somewhere between the 65 and 70, early 70 mark in terms of turnout. So there's a lot of people who are not voting in local government elections, although you are supposed to. Mm-hmm.
And the fine is getting higher every election for not voting. So last time the fine was about $70, and that was quite a steep increase on the previous council election. People genuinely do walk past when we're doing pre-poll and say, oh God, I don't have to vote in local government elections. I'm not going to vote. And you have to explain to them, oh, you actually do. The only category that doesn't have to vote in local government elections in Victoria is if you're over 65. And that's the only level of government where once you reach a certain age, you don't still have to vote. Of course you can, and we very strongly encourage people over 65 to vote in local government elections because they use a lot of local government services such as Meals on Wheels and aged care in the home. So very strongly encourage them to vote because it has a direct impact on their life, but they don't have to. Yeah, it's great that you're asking so many questions. Yeah. So the question at home was how many candidates. So last election, it was quite varied across our 3 wards. In the South Ward, we had 8 candidates for the 3 spots that were available. In the North East Ward, democracy was very strongly exercised and we had 24 candidates for the 4 spots that were available. And in the North West Ward, we had 18 candidates for the 4 spots. So the North Wards in particular do have a very healthy representation of candidates, or that's certainly been the experience of the last election. But this election, who knows? It could be that high, it could be higher again, it could be much lower.
Got a question from I actually have an online viewer question, so thank you. The question is, how long did it take you to learn council processes? And what advice would you pass on to a new councillor? So I'll go one at a time.
One of the previous councillors who got onto council again at the last election said to me early on in the piece, said, your first term, you're just learning. Your second term is when you feel like you can do stuff. So generally, it takes a long time to learn those processes. But that was a good caveat, just to also give you a bit of permission to have a bit of time, because it does take a little while. I don't think it takes, 4 years you're just with your training wheels on. But I think it varies depending on how much experience you've had at that type of level of governance as well. So it does take a little while. You're still able to do a lot of things, and you get great support from the governance officers and previous councillors who've served with prior on council who might be coming back for a second or third term. I found that really helpful to understand the processes. So it can really, really vary. And I think, 6 months to a year, you sort of feel like you've got a hang of the processes and you can sort of be more proactive than reactive. There's a lot of learning in the first year and getting a background on the number of issues that council might be deliberating on that actually started before you started your term. So I found that was the biggest area of learning. But then, you get the hang of it and move forward. So I think seeking out some extra support as well to be able to learn quickly. So we had the opportunity to do a couple of courses, for example, that really accelerates your learning in terms of governance. And I found that really, really helpful.
Yeah, I'd say similar. Look, I've evolved so much as a representative since first getting elected to council, and I don't think I really knew what to expect when I came on, even though I was replacing somebody who I knew very well and who was a good friend and gave me a lot of mentoring and advice, and I knew other women who'd been mayors of the city of Brunswick before it became Moreland, who also gave me really wonderful advice to diversify what I did on council. So one of the tips they gave me was, when I came on, I'd campaigned very strongly on the arts and on the status of women. And they said, in your first year, really take on committees and responsibilities that are close to what you're comfortable with and what you do know while you find your feet, because that will give you the opportunity to go out there and have an impact and get some work done, but, not in a space that you're still learning about. And then once you hit the second year, take the opportunity to challenge yourself by doing something that's a little bit outside of that experience. So in my second year, I chose to become chair of the Urban Planning Committee, which was, very different to talking about the arts, but an incredibly valuable experience, because in the ward that I represent in Brunswick, we just have so much development taking place. That being in that hot seat and making those decisions was something that the community that I represent really wanted to see me doing. So I think that, in that first year on council, it is, don't feel like you need to rush through the first 2 to 3 months and know everything immediately, because none of us know everything immediately. You will be overwhelmed by the amount of reading that is required of a councillor. I remember our second council meeting, we were passing some really huge planning and infrastructure matters, and I think our second council agenda was somewhere in the vicinity of 800 pages. And I thought, my gosh, how are we going to handle this every month with an urban planning committee meeting as well? And then I did the company directors course, and that had reading about this thick. So there is a lot of reading. If you can learn speed reading as a skill, then good on you. And I always wanted to do the supplementary readings as well, because there's like the overview document that tells you the stuff that you really need to know. But then there's often attachments that sort of take you through, well, we surveyed the community and this is what they said, and here are a bunch of maps that will tell you a little bit more about this. And I always wanted to read that too. So be prepared for the reading. Take on roles in the first year that you are comfortable with and that will help you to grow a little bit in the process and give you the time to sort of wrap your head around the stuff that you're less familiar with, and then sort of challenge yourself as the years wear on to try new things.
Thank you. Now I'm just realising we're close to 8 or just after 8. If there aren't any other questions, I'm just sort of looking. I think we're good for questions. Thank you. Oh, one last one. So we'll make this the last one. Yep.
What are the personal rewards at the end of your term? I know every individual would be different. We have got all different perspectives. We grow up in different cultures.
So the question is, what are the personal rewards at the end of a term?
I think everyone, as you say, is different. And for many of us, we'll hope that this isn't the very end of our terms and might be seeking re-election and still have things left that we want to do. But coming to the end of my first term on council, I am really about getting things done and seeing things take place. And so in our first year of council, there were projects that we came up with that have been delivered in the third or this fourth year of council. Yeah, absolutely. So my big one is the Wilson Avenue Community Park that I mentioned earlier, which I think was Brunswick's first new park in about 10 to 15 years. We haven't had a new park in a while. We've had a few park upgrades. But for me, that was a big one because when we were sort of coming into our second year on council, there was a bit of community consternation about the idea of putting that park there and closing off road access, especially for the businesses at the end of that street. And we really had to do some community education around why that was a good idea and why it would actually improve safety. There were people in the community who were saying, well, hang on, won't putting a bouldering wall at the end of a street bring, unpleasant behaviour or something like that, and trying to put out that message, well, no, it will actually activate a sporting community and improve perceptions of space. So I'm really proud of that project. I was really proud in my year as mayor that there was a significant boost to our arts budget because I have thought for a while that our arts budget needs a bit of a boost, and so that was something that I'd been pushing for a little while, and so I took some money out of the mayoral car allowance that year because I chose not to have a car, and I put it into our arts budget instead. So those are probably the two things that I'm most proud of pushing for during my term on council, but there's lots of other things that we've opened in the last few years and that we have voted for as a council as a whole. Individuals will push for projects that are dear to them and policies that they are particularly supportive of, and will try to get their fellow councillors on side to support those things. But at the end of the day, we do make those decisions as a group, and so our achievements are as a group as well.
I'll be quick, just in terms of time. So I guess what I say, and that's a fantastic account of the different types of achievements and personal rewards that you can gain from being a councillor. One thing I've been thinking about and reflecting on in the last 6 months particularly is that I think I've become, when you get into council, you probably hear lots of things about council and, it is quite challenging as a role as well. But I actually think I've become more optimistic than I was before. And that surprised me, actually, because I would have thought that I would have become a bit more cynical in some ways just because it's rough and tumble sometimes. But I think I've seen what a few people can really achieve by working together. I've learned a lot about what it takes to be, I think, I've hope to be a good representative. And, I think we're on a journey, all of us, to be better representatives. But I've seen some great examples of representation, and I think it is a commitment to community service and a dedication to people and an openness and a spirit of working together that actually gets outcomes. And no matter what background you come from, and we've got great diversity on council, I think those people putting their heads together to achieve something, we have achieved a lot. And I'm really optimistic about what people can do. So I've learned that, I've gained that from council. So I'm very thankful for that.
Sure.
Some of us are 3 councillors, North East, North West, 4 each. How do you deal with possibly an imbalance in numbers and so more funding in infrastructure projects heading north rather than in the South Ward?
So the question was with the different numbers of councillors in the different wards, so 3 in the South Ward, 4 in each of the 2 northern wards. The question is, how do you deal with potential imbalances in terms of the numbers and where investment goes?
I think if you spoke to any of the North Ward councillors, they would tell you that that's not the way that they feel. So they've has often been a strong sentiment that the South Ward does get a lot of the project. I don't necessarily, obviously as a South Ward council, I don't necessarily agree that that's true. There has been a lot of growth in the South Ward, and we do have some very ageing infrastructure in the South Ward, and so the work that we have done there is crucially important. And in the next couple of years, you will see some very major infrastructure upgrades in the northern wards. So those being the Oak Park baths, and we also opened the CB Smith Reserve here in the North East Ward last year, which is a major soccer pavilion. So those are just 2 of the examples. So we do spread out the infrastructure projects and upgrades across the wards. In terms of the number of councillors representing those wards, it's based on population, and that was drawn at the last council election and can't be reconsidered again until the next council election. It's something that they're prepared to do every 8 years. So it was decided then to change the size of the South Ward and make it geographically smaller so that 3 councillors were still representative of the size of that community, and the 2 North Wards became a little bit bigger so that the 4 councillors was representative. So it's not a whole answer to your question, it's a limited answer because of the short time that we have, but I do think that, you know, each of us fights for our own wards, but we also represent the city as a whole. And so whilst it's been great in the last couple of years to see a couple of really big things in the South Ward, like the upgrade at the Brunswick Library, and finally opening the upgrade at the Brunswick Baths as well, those have both happened in this term, it's good that there are a couple of major projects coming up in the Northern Wards as well.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. That concludes the formal part of our evening, but I encourage everybody to stay and to ask any questions, and also to take the opportunity to actually expand each other's networks and talk a little bit to each other and talk a bit more to us. We would love that. Thank you also to our viewers at home, and to the question that we got. That was very exciting. So please feel free, now we know each other, please feel free to get in touch. If you've got any further questions for our councillors also, please feel free to get in touch. We're also running another session for all prospective candidates in August. That's through the MAV, the Municipal Association of Victoria, and that's another opportunity to meet members of the community who are also considering to run, and to get some further insights into the election process. There's some printed material at the back of the room, which looks actually really interesting and I think answers quite a bit of the questions that also, I'm sure this is probably, you'll get home and 3 a.m. you'll think of some new ones, so there'll be some great material that you can have a look at. And I mean, ultimately I hope tonight has been a really worthwhile experience for everybody, and that you leave, again, as I said, inspired and excited for the months to come as we head towards the election. So thank you, everybody.